How to cook chuck steak. You've probably seen a chuck steak at the meat counter and wondered how to prepare this inexpensive cut. Since the chuck steak comes from near the neck of the cattle, the cut can become tough if cooked improperly. Chuck steak is best when you cook it long and slow, like braising it in the oven, or quickly, like broiling or pan-frying it. Choose a technique that fits your skill level and you'll soon see why chuck steak is a delicious and popular cut. Ingredients for braising chuck steak. For broiling chuck steak. For pan-frying chuck steak. Method 1: Braising chuck steak. (1) Preheat the oven and season the steak. Turn the oven on to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, 162 C. Place 2 tablespoons of vegetable or canola oil in a large pot or Dutch oven. Heat the oil over medium heat and sprinkle the chuck steak with salt and pepper. You could use a big skillet if your chuck steaks are thin. 2. Sear the chuck steak. Once the oil is hot and shimmering, add the seasoned steak to the Dutch oven. The steak will sizzle as soon as you add it to the pot. Let the steak cook on medium heat until it browns. Use tongs to turn the steak so that it browns on all sides. Use the tongs to take the steaks out of the pot once they're seared. Pour off and discard any fat from the pan. Wear oven mitts when searing the steak since the hot oil may sputter. 3. Add a liquid. Pour in about 3/4 of a cup of liquid. This will keep the chuck steak moist as it cooks and will make it even more tender. Try using one of the following as braising liquids: beef or vegetable broth, apple juice or cider, cranberry juice, tomato juice, dry wine mixed with broth water, 1 tablespoon of a liquid seasoning like barbecue sauce, Dijon mustard, soy sauce, steak sauce or Worcestershire sauce. You can add these to water to dilute them. 4. Stir in dry seasonings. To add even more flavor to your braised chuck steak, stir in dried herbs of your choice. You'll need to stir in about 1 teaspoon of dried herbs or 1 tablespoon of fresh herbs. You can use herbs like basil, herbes de Provence, Italian seasoning, oregano, thyme. 5. Braise the steak in the oven. Cover the Dutch oven with a heavy lid and place the steak in the oven. For 2 to 3 pounds of chuck steak, bake the steak for 1 hour and 15 minutes to 1 hour and 45 minutes. The chuck steak will be completely tender when it's finished braising and ready to serve. If you check the temperature, the steak should be between 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 62 C, for medium rare and 175 F, 79 C, for well done. To check tenderness, insert a fork or knife into the steak. If tender, the fork or knife should slide in easily. Method 2: Broiling chuck steak. (1) Turn on the broiler and season the steak. If your broiler is in the top part of the oven, move the oven rack about 4 inches away from the broiler element. If the broiler is in a sliding tray under the oven, You won't need to adjust the rack. Turn the broiler on while you salt and pepper both sides of your chuck. Steak. If you like, you can use any steak seasoning to flavor the chuck steak. 2. Broil one side of the steak. Place the seasoned steak onto a baking sheet or skillet and place it below the broiler. Depending on the thickness of the steak, broil it for 7 to 9 minutes. If you'd like it on the medium or rare side, cook it closer to 6 or 7 minutes, depending on the type of broiler you have. You may want to leave your oven door cracked so you can monitor the cooking. 3. Turn and broil the other side of the steak. Use a sharp fork or kitchen tongs to carefully turn the chuck steak. Place the steak back under the broiler and let it cook for another 5 to 8 minutes, depending on thickness. Check the steak's temperature. If you want a medium rare steak, remove it from the broiler at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 C. For a medium steak, let it cook to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 C. 4. Let the steak rest and serve it. Remove the steak to a cutting board or serving plate. Place aluminum foil over the steak so it forms a tent and let the steak rest for about 5 minutes. This will help the muscle tissue in the steak redistribute the juice so it doesn't all run out when you begin cutting. The steak should cool down about 5 degrees from the time you take it out from the broiler and after it's rested. Method 3. Pan frying chuck steak. One. Turn on the oven and season your steak. Preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 204 C. Season your steak with any kind of seasoning you like. If you want to keep it simple, just use coarse salt and pepper. Don't be afraid to coat both sides of your steak with the seasoning since this will give it flavor and help it brown. You should be able to see seasoning on the steak. You could also use Cajun seasoning, chimichurri, teriyaki, Montreal steak seasoning. 2. Heat a skillet. Place a heavy-bottomed skillet, preferably a cast iron skillet, over high heat. Add a few tablespoons of coconut oil, grapeseed oil, or vegetable oil in the pan to heat. You want the pan to get really hot so the steak sizzles immediately and begins to brown. Coconut, grapeseed, and vegetable oils all have high smoke points so they won't burn as your pan heats up. Avoid pan frying a steak in butter or olive oil which will burn. 3. Sear both sides of the steak. Place the steak in your hot oiled skillet and let it cook for 1 to 3 minutes. Carefully turn the steak and sear the other side for another 1 to 3 minutes. The steak should be a dark golden brown color on the sides. It will still be mostly raw inside, but you'll finish the steak in the oven for even cooking. You can turn the steaks frequently while they're searing so they sear evenly and brown faster. 4. Finish cooking the steak in the oven. Place the entire skillet with the seared steak into the preheated oven. Cook the steak for 6 to 8 minutes or until the steak reaches the level of doneness you'd like. If you check the temperature, the steak should be between 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 62 C, for medium rare and 175 F, 79 C. For well done, transfer the steak to a plate and let it rest a few minutes before you serve it. Letting the steak rest helps the juices in the meat distribute evenly. Ensure your skillet is oven-proof before placing it in the oven, even if it says it's oven-proof. Check to see if it can be used in a 400-degree Fahrenheit oven. Method for selecting and serving chuck steak. One. Choose the chuck steak. If you're buying a steak to feed several people, try to choose smaller steaks that are about the same size. If you can't find any, you can purchase 1 or 2 larger steaks to cut into smaller portions. This way, the steaks will cook evenly. Chuck steaks can be irregular since they include a lot of muscle from the shoulder area of the beef. Look for a chuck steak that doesn't have too much fat and seems to be an even thickness. 2. Store and handle the chuck steak. Try to use your fresh chuck steaks as soon as you bring them home. If you can't use them immediately, you can refrigerate them for up to 2 or 3 days. To store them, remove them from the plastic wrap covering and place them in a non-plastic dish. Cover the dish loosely so there's some airflow. Put the steaks in the meat compartment of your fridge or put them on the bottom shelf so any juices don't drip onto other food. When handling and storing raw meat, it's important not to place, touch or store raw and cooked meat together. Keep them in separate compartments and use different cutting boards when wrapping and handling them. 3. Serve the chuck steak. For a classic meal, serve the chuck steak with cooked potatoes, mashed or roasted, and a side salad. For more adventurous sides, consider serving the chuck steak with coleslaw, roasted vegetables, a vegetable gratin, or sautéed mushrooms. You can also serve the steak with almost any kind of sauce, barbecue, pesto, hollandaise, or a flavored butter. You can also thinly slice the chuck steak and serve with stir-fried vegetables and rice, or you can fill a tortilla with the thinly sliced chuck steak to make fajitas.